also been responsible for planning and implementation of this initiative, as well as engaging with leadership of relevant stakeholders in government, businesses, and academia, and civil society at the highest levels to advocate and promote sustainable energy for all, which I think is something that we are all interested in seeing. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome him. Next, we have Jubril Adewale Tinubu. He's the Group Chief Executive of Oando, Nigeria. He's also a Young Global Leader alumnus. He, in 2002, led the largest ever acquisition of a quoted Nigerian company with the acquisition of Ajip and Unipetrol. And he's been an Africa Business Leader of the Year winner in 2007, an African Business Magazine and Commonwealth Business Council in 2010. Please welcome him. Next, we have Shari Berenbach. Shari is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the United States of African Development Foundation in the United States. She has a 30-year career spanning microfinance and international banking. She's done international development work, including in-country programming in more than 24 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. She sits on numerous boards. I'm sure she'll be a wealth of opportunity. Welcome, Shari. Thank you. And finally, we have Ned Tozun. Ned is the president of D-Light Design in the United States. He's also a social entrepreneur. D-Light is a sustainable energy company looking to bring about revolution in that field for Africa and the world. Thanks for joining us, Ned. Appreciate it. Okay, as I said, I want to keep this discussion flowing. I want to keep it, we want to hear your voices. I will kick it off, as I tend to do, with a couple of questions that I'll throw out to the group. I'm not here to pick on anybody. I'm not here to single anybody out. I think we all want to have a fulfilling discussion around energy and what the possibilities can be for the future. And so I jotted down a couple of questions and a couple of notes. And again, as I said, this question is meant for everybody. So anybody feel free to jump in and answer it. So on a continent that is full of natural resource wealth, where economic growth typically outpaces most other regions in the world, Africa is often referred to as the dark continent, with access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa at only 17%. So I'd like to hear what's being done in perhaps Europe, some of the countries that you live in, and how you can extrapolate what's worked there to other countries and perhaps the world, and specifically in Africa. Minister, let's start with you.
Thank you. I think that you're quite right, obviously. We are a very resource-rich continent. And I think that over the ages, over the years, in Nigeria, for instance, in the last 70 years, we have become Africa's largest producer in terms of oil and gas. Unfortunately, how that is parlayed into actual, real engagement of the polity all the way down the spectrum is a different issue altogether. I think for too long, Africa's middle class has had a squeeze. So you actually begin to have the wealthy and, of course, the poor, to put it in the best way possible. I think the work ahead of us now is to ensure that the output of these resources is adequately and efficiently, not to mention expediently, deployed all the way across the spectrum. And I think that feeds into so many aspects of our development in Africa, in terms of our economies, both in terms of the security issues we're seeing arising all over Africa, and the development nexus as well, both inside our nation states and across regional development zones in Africa. So you will find that the infrastructural deficit in the continent is extremely high, amongst other issues that we're finding. So we do have a lot of work in front of us. And I think in areas like Nigeria, food exploration and production country all these years, we are abundantly blessed with gas resources, and it is in gas that we can actually reach the real economy and commercialize it, industrialize it in such a way that it begins to generate employment and provide real jobs for the people. When you talk about petrochemical plants, fertilizer plants, central processing facilities, some of which are involved in, LPG production and fabrication for the people, you are beginning to touch the real wealth of the indigence and the polity of your country. Crude is a highly technological and capital-intensive upstream venture, so it does not touch the vast population, while, of course, it provides revenues for the nation state. But we have to look at how we empower our polities, empower our peoples, and begin to enrich the very indigents upon whose land, or in whose land, we derive this wealth of natural resources from. So there are a lot of complex issues, I think, that surround this in Africa today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yumkela, in Sierra Leone, we have seen Sierra Leone is a smaller country. You're talking about the giant of Africa here, and Sierra Leone, a much smaller country, but also abundantly blessed with natural resources. How are you? Are there is there something that can be extrapolated for as to what they're doing in the bigger countries that you can look to a smaller country to do, or can you share insights for a giant like Nigeria as to what's been successful in Sierra Leone?
Have major anchor demand. They have major demand centers, but probably as a regional approach. So the whole issue of energy trading, transmission lines, common pipelines to share resources, not as gifts, but in terms of pulling resources together so they become a little bit more attractive for the private sector. One last comment I'll make is oil and gas. We have, even big Nigeria has not taken gas as serious as Minister has now pushed the country to do.
So it's now that it's sort of...
Yeah, it was an accidental find. Mm-hmm. The issue here was gas, but I hear in many forums, Nigeria is the gas country that happens to have oil. But here again, we should all be so blessed. I wish. Finally, the point here is, all over Africa, we're discovering oil and gas. 9 out of the 12 discoveries in 2012 were in Africa. The question for African leadership today is the following. How do you capitalize on that resource to power your economies towards industrialization and economic diversification? It is that target that will make them realize the crucial importance of energy. And within that context, again, regional initiatives that make those markets attractive. Some can generate power and sell to others. Right. And we can all be lifted into prosperity. Those are the issues now we should look at, because what I hear a lot is LNG. Mm-hmm. You need the revenues, sure, but don't forget to power your economy, or what Minister said, LPG. A lot of women and children are dying in Africa because of lack of access to energy, basic energy sources. But I see Delight and Shari will touch on decentralized.
I see them nodding their heads and eagerly waiting to jump into the conversation. And Shari, a lot of people that I've talked to here have said to me often that they don't see the benefits of having these rich natural resources at their disposal. And it's not just in Nigeria, it's across many African countries where people, not in the middle class, say, yeah, I know we have oil, I know we have gas, I know we have bauxite, but my life has no bearing as to what happens with those materials.
Great point to raise. And from our viewpoint, we think it's really important that there is the kind of large infrastructure investment and policy regimes that you were talking about in terms of really developing, the big economy. At the same time, what the U.S. African Development Foundation is very active in the rural areas and rural communities. And what we have come to recognize is that the model, let's say from the United States, where it was just a matter of time of waiting for the grid to reach the rest of the country, that's not really a model that makes sense for a country like Nigeria or Sierra Leone or truly for most of Africa. Because I think what we see is that there are large industry and population centers that, yes, will be powered and served by the grid, but there are a significant share of the population is really in the rural areas that are at great distances from these power centers. And so there's really a need for a new generation of technologies that will be driven through off-grid solutions, through smaller companies that will both generate and distribute, through household-level solutions. I think we're about on the eve of a lot of new innovation and technology to see how can we make energy affordable, accessible to even the most remote rural communities on the continent.
But Shari, explain something to me like I'm a 2-year-old, because this stuff tends to fly way over my head. You said something interesting. that in many countries in Africa, people live far away from the big commercial centers, for example, Lagos. But when electricity was first introduced, if you had power centers in New York City or you had it in San Francisco, eventually it made it to El Paso, Texas. Why is that not a model that can work? And the United States most people don't think it, but the United States is actually a big country. And so why wouldn't it work here?
Well, it's not just that why it wouldn't work, but it's really more what is the sort of best opportunity for us. In the same way we all used to think that we would wait for the telephone company to bring, phone lines to throughout the country, and then the cell phone industry came in, and a whole new wave of technology found ways to bring down the cost, to make it more affordable and more accessible. And so there's really no reason to go about creating almost like a dinosaur approach to infrastructure when more nimble, more cost-effective, new kinds of solutions are being developed. And in fact, the USADF, my institution, has teamed up with General Electric and USAID to launch an off-grid energy challenge where we're making available $100,000 grants to small and medium enterprises that are on developing new kinds of technologies to bring energy to rural marginalized communities. There's really no need to have the kind of centralization that we've had that you have in large countries like the United States, in part because there's a lot of hidden cost and loss of energy through long transmission and distribution. And there are really better solutions that are available today that we need to get onto.
And so, Ned, is that something that will be powered by the private sector and not necessarily the government? Or will it mean, as you said, the deregulation in some cases, which then will allow companies like yours to succeed?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be a combination of a lot of different players and forces. And this is a huge, energy access is a huge problem. And there's certainly a need for further infrastructure development, especially when you have dense urban centers, dense communities of people. There it really makes sense to make that kind of infrastructure investment and to be thinking about resources like gas and oil. It's our view, so I'm with the company called D-Light. We make these decentralized off-grid solutions. And because I'm a product person, I have to just always show in examples to capture people's imagination. We make products, everything, from something small-scale solar up to solar home systems. But this is an example of a product. You charge it in the sun, and you get 4 hours of light at night. It replaces a kerosene lamp. So it's an example of, and we've been doubling every year in scale. We're currently selling up to 500,000 units every month, half of which in Africa. So there's clearly a demand and a growing demand for these products. And what we find, and in addition to that, once people get access to these kinds of solutions, they want more power. They want to charge more devices and do more things. And the technology trend for solar products is all moving in a direction where it's becoming possible to make these kinds of solutions very affordable, to break out the payments over time so people don't have to pay the upfront cost all at once. And that really opens up a huge opportunity. I think Shari said it really well, of making an analogy to the mobile phone industry, where you actually, Africa, there's an opportunity here because there isn't this fixed infrastructure. You can actually do things in a much more modern and innovative way and capture some of the trends in technology that are happening. And it's our company's belief that the way the trend is moving is for these decentralized, market-driven solutions. It doesn't mean it's all going to be solar, but we think solar is going to be a big component of it, especially in reaching these more remote rural areas where it's just extremely costly to build the infrastructure. It's estimated that it would cost globally to get access to build the infrastructure for folks who are living off-grid would cost $700 billion just to build the infrastructure. That's not even considering the cost to power that infrastructure every year. So we really believe that there's some very exciting trends with technology that are going to enable customers living in rural villages to really just leapfrog and have a much more sustainable, renewable, clean source of power in their development. We're quite excited about that.
But how much does something, that device, cost versus somebody who's like, look, the kerosene is still going to be cheaper. I can't afford that.
So, yeah, actually, these products range between $8 to $10 retail. People tend to spend $4 or $5 a month on kerosene. So the payback is extremely fast. And our customers, they're savvy investors. These are smart people living in villages, and they know if they can save up that money, and a lot of them can save up money for $10 for a phone, they're willing to make that investment because it pays for itself. Where it's challenging is, this is unknown technology, so customers may be resistant at first, and that's really our job to educate the customer, do marketing, and have a solid warranty